Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Sagacity. Today I have with me Dr. Regina Mangieri. She is an assistant professor of pharmacology and toxicology at the University of Texas at Austin in the United States. Regina, welcome to Sagacity.
Hello, happy to be here.
I wanted to talk a little bit about what your work entails. Tell us who you are and what you do.
So I'm a researcher in the College of Pharmacy at UT Austin, like you said, and I run a research lab of a few graduate students and technicians, and we're interested in the biology of alcohol use disorder. And then more recently, we've gotten interested in the biology of aggression and specifically pathological aggression. And then we're also interested in studying the interaction between the biology of aggression and alcohol use and how sometimes those two things can go together. So we're basically interested in understanding the brain mechanisms that contribute to those behaviors.
And tell us a little bit about why this topic is important.
Well, alcohol use is prevalent around the world, or most areas of the world. And there are some medications to help with treatment of excessive alcohol use, but they don't work for everybody. And so it is important for us to keep working to find new medications that could help people reduce their alcohol consumption. And then aggression and violence are also pretty prevalent issues. And so I think it's sort of understood that we want to reduce aggression and violence in society. And so not a lot is known about the biology of aggression, and in particular, aggression that is pathological. So that would be, sometimes aggression can be useful from an evolutionary perspective, but we're talking more about aggression that we think that people just sort of become, I don't like to use the word addicted, but they are engaging in aggression in a way that is not beneficial to them. Or to other people. And so we want to understand the biology of that. And then understand why some people seem to choose to engage in both excessive aggression and alcohol use. But we're doing that all from the perspective of a mouse model, with the idea that we could maybe also develop new drug treatments for aggression.
Thank you so much for telling us what your research is focusing on. What inspired you to pursue a career in research, and how did you choose your specific field of study?
Yeah, so it was a wandering path, I would say. I started an undergraduate in the field of psychology, and just because I thought it seemed interesting. And then after taking some courses, I realized that I really liked the biological aspects of understanding behavior and how the brain works. And I also liked the idea that drugs and medication can change the brain and behavior. And so I ended up going to graduate school for pharmacology. So essentially the study of how drugs work and how we might develop new drugs. And during graduate school, I studied mood disorders, which was interesting to me, but I think I've always found addiction-like behavior to be extremely interesting. And so for my postdoctoral work, I chose to study alcohol use in a rat model, and now I use mouse models.
What's the difference?
I'd say from big picture, there's not a huge difference. Overall, I would say that in terms of modeling human behavior, both rats and mice are useful. They perform a lot of behaviors that are similar to humans. But from like a practical perspective, a major difference is really the size of mice, that it's easier to house more mice, so the costs are less. So there's like a financial benefit to using mice. And then mice, we have a lot more genetic tools for manipulating their genes. And so there are many fewer options for rats if you wanted to manipulate their genes or put in genes that wouldn't normally be there that help you to look at specific types of cells, say in the brain or body. And so just from a tools perspective, mice can be a lot more useful. But if you're trying to do a complex behavior, people usually prefer rats because they are a little bit smarter. So it's easier to do more complicated behavior with them.
Okay, very interesting. I wanted to ask you about how you got here. You talked a little bit about your undergrad. From that point, how did you get through graduate studies and then get your PhD? And how did you get to the place where you're at today?
So as we said, I did undergraduate study, and I got a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. And while I was a senior in undergrad, I applied to PhD programs. And so I went from, after I got my undergraduate degree, I entered a PhD program that was a 5-year program. I ended up taking about 5.5 years to finish. And then at that point, it's usual in my field that you would do a postdoctoral study as well for a period of a few years. So I guess to give a little more detail, I did my undergraduate work at a liberal arts college in Illinois, and then I did my PhD work at the University of California in Irvine. And then I came to Texas, where I am now, to do postdoctoral study. So that's when I started studying alcohol, and I learned some techniques in neurochemistry and behavior, but then I wanted to learn another technique called electrophysiology, where we can study the electrical activity in the brain, which I thought was really cool. So I did a second period of postdoctoral study. So I did 4 years in my first postdoc, and then 2 years. They officially only let you be a postdoc for 5 years total. So officially I was a postdoc for 1 year in that second lab, but then I stayed in that lab for 6 more years as a research scientist until 2018, when I applied to be a research assistant professor. And so I've been a research assistant professor since 2018, and I've had my own lab since then.
Through being a research assistant professor, are you only focusing on researching and mentoring or supervising students, or are you also teaching?
So I have minimum teaching responsibilities. So as a research professor, I'm currently paid by NIH grants. And so because my salary is paid by those grants, that they're all research focused, that's what I do. Occasionally I will help out and give like a guest lecture for an hour here and there on something, but I don't have any actual formal obligations to teach. So the majority of my time is mentoring students and doing research in the lab.
Okay, great. I wanted to ask you, what are some of the challenges or unexpected surprises that you faced in your journey from, doing grad studies to getting here?
So I do remember that when I did my graduate work, I think there was a really big surprise for me. And I've talked to other students since then and current students, and they all kind of agree that we went into it thinking it was going to be academically very difficult, just like maybe the science would be hard or to grasp. But what I found was that it was actually there was a lot of personal growth, just in terms of like time management, emotion regulation. I think for most people, it's the first time in your life where like you have a multi-year time horizon on a goal, which is it's definitely abnormal. And so I think getting used to that lifestyle where you're working towards something and you have to go months to years before you get any kind of small reward and multiple years before you get the big reward of the degree. I think that it's a big leap for people. And so I actually found that to be a big challenge, just that feeling of like, wow, when am I going to finish this? And like, when is my life really going to start? Because like you finish undergrad and you think, okay, like I should be taken seriously now. And then you find out that there's another stage, and then you get your Ph.D. And then I was like, wait, I'm still not a real grown-up according to the scientific community. So I think that a lot of people go through that feeling of like, when am I going to be taken seriously? And I would say it wasn't really till I had my own lab that I definitely felt like, okay, now people are taking me seriously. I think after a few years of my postdoc, there was definitely a shift. So that was nice, but getting my own lab was helpful, and then getting grants as well. So that's a major challenge that people in my area of science talk about, is just getting grant funding. It's kind of outside of publication. It's our other biggest task is we need to publish our research and we need to fund our research. And so I've been pretty successful so far in getting my work funded. So that's been great. So now like a challenge that I'm experiencing is I have money, but now I need to train people to do the work. But I always say it's a good problem to have, because a worse problem would be no job, no money. So having a position, having the funding is a good problematic situation to be in.
For sure. That takes me to my next question. If you were to take in PhD students or graduate students to work on topics in your area, what are some of the existing gaps that they could work on that you would like to put out there so people can maybe perhaps contact you if they would like to work on them?
So one of the projects that we are funded to work on, but we still haven't had anybody jump at the opportunity yet, is to study these types of cells in the brain that they're not neurons. So neurons are the main brain cell that people know about, but there are other types of cells in the brain. And I'd say over the last decade or so, we've learned that these other types of cells that we call like neuroimmune cells or glia, they're also very important for behavior, and in particular in the way that the brain responds to excessive alcohol use. And so it's a kind of a new area for me. It's a new area for the field. And I think as a student would be a really exciting area, because we know so little about what these glia cells are doing. And then in my lab in particular, we're wanting to use a technique called electrophysiology to study the activity of these cells, which is almost never used by people, but it's what I know. It's a technique that I know for studying neurons. And so I wanted to apply it to glia, which I think reviewers thought was exciting, but they were also skeptical. So I really want to show people that this is a viable technique for studying these cells, because we can measure their activity while they're still, let's say, alive or doing things. Often people will collect these brain cells and look at them after they're no longer alive. But the technique that I want to use allows us in a brain slice to follow the activity of these cells and understand how, for example, if they get alcohol put on them, how they may change their function in response to alcohol. So I think that's a really exciting area that there's a ton of work to be done and would make for a pretty cool PhD project that I think it might be a little daunting because it's so open-ended, but if we narrow down on like a specific target to look at, I think it could be pretty cool.
Okay, I wanted to go back to talking about challenges. What are some of the challenges associated with doing research that are particular to the country or the state in which you're in or you're doing your work that you believe should be addressed to ease the lives of researchers? So imagine talking to decision makers and funders, sending them a message, perhaps.
Yeah, so one thing that I know that I would like to see changed, that it doesn't affect me, but it affects trainees, is that a lot of fellowships that are offered by the US government require that the recipient of the training fellowship be a full-time student. And so that is definitely a barrier to non-traditional students. So if somebody has family obligations or just they aren't able to attend school full-time, they wouldn't be eligible for those fellowships. And essentially that's how graduate programs are as well. I hadn't really thought about that, but I think if we could rethink our model of how PhD programs need to go and how we fund those students to allow for a more diversity of schedules, I think that that would really help to promote access to research careers for more people. So I was a single parent. I was a teen mom and a single parent. So I know what it's like to have family obligations. I mean, luckily I was able to balance it all, but that was definitely kind of a big challenge, is that expectation that I felt like I had to perform like my peers who had no family obligations, and I had a young child at home during my PhD. So I would say that's definitely one barrier in this country. I can't really speak to how it is in other countries, but I do know in the United States, PhD programs and fellowships usually require that somebody do 40 hours a week. And so I'd like to see some thinking about how we could change that.
Definitely, I would agree with that. I had some terms where I had to go part-time during my PhD, and the funding doesn't apply anymore if you go part-time, which is very inconvenient.
Yeah.
It's an added stress. Life would be a lot easier if part-time students were funded at least partially. But definitely a good point. Now, shifting gears, can you share any memorable moments or celebratory experiences from your career as a researcher so far? What's good about being a researcher?
Let's see. I mean, I would say every time I've had a grant funded, it's been pretty great to know that I've had an idea or worked on an idea with other people and spent a lot of time thinking about it and developing it, and then sent it to reviewers, and then they think it's cool too. So just getting my good scores and getting my grants funded has already been extremely gratifying to me, to just receive that feedback that I have some good ideas that other people think are worth following up on. In terms of exciting findings, I would say, so no drug has ultimately come out of this, but most of my PhD work was on new approaches to treating depression using drugs that target the endogenous cannabinoid system. So these are the biological molecules in your brain that act similar to THC, the main active ingredient in marijuana, but our drugs did not make the animals seem intoxicated, but it reduced their anxiety and depression. And so that was overall really enjoyable to me, to know that I was working on a new area to try to treat depression, because there are good drugs for depression, but they don't work for everybody. So just working in a completely new area was pretty cool. And then more recently, my lab has been a part of a consortium. So it's like a group of labs of about 10 labs throughout the United States. And we were funded through a special mechanism through the National Institute on Alcohol and Alcohol-Associated Effects. And the idea is that we each bring different perspectives and skills, but we work together to try to develop new drugs to treat excessive alcohol use. And so I worked on a project with several other labs for the last few years, and that study was published earlier this year. But the cool thing is that one of my colleagues found that this drug that is already FDA approved for psoriasis, it's called Otezla, or the generic is apremilast. It reduces alcohol consumption in rats and mice. And so my lab helped to look at its mechanism in the brain, and several other labs tested it in other mouse models of drinking. And then one of our other colleagues tested it in human subjects who were not treatment seeking, but they were heavy alcohol users. And they took the drug for a period of 2 weeks. And over those 2 weeks, they reduced their alcohol drinking relative to the placebo controls. And so that was really cool that a drug that we have already shown is safe, or not we, the royal we, like somebody else has demonstrated that the drug is safe for the treatment of psoriasis. So it was easier to get approval to do our small test in humans, and it worked in humans. And so now they're working to further develop that. But the idea that there's actually a drug pretty close to being ready that could be used to help people reduce their alcohol intake that was really gratifying to work on something that is actually usable soon.
That's wonderful. I mean, when you have those kind of victories, it's really exciting. The next question I had was about what your day looks like as a research assistant professor from morning to, let's say, till you finish and wrap things up.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the day, but I would say a lot of it is spent at the computer, answering emails. Not too much. I try not to do too much answering of emails, but analyzing data. So I do a lot of the research myself still. So a good portion of how I spend my day is actually helping to do data analysis or plan experiments. And then I'm also trying to train new people in my lab, and I meet with all my people once a week, one-on-one, to basically I try to give them the opportunity to just ask me whatever they want. A lot of it is sort of practical, like what are you working on this week, but also just general mentoring. So that's a good portion of my time, is just mentoring students or helping people think about how to plan experiments. And I also try to stay up on research. So it's a smaller percentage of time, but I definitely do spend a few hours a week going to seminars or reading papers to try and stay current on new developments. I don't think I'm leaving anything out. Those are the main things that I do.
Okay.
In terms of like in the lab, collecting data, like actually helping run the experiments.
Okay. So, you also talked about grant writing, which is a big part of your work. With all of these tasks that you have to do, how do you maintain a balance?
Yeah, so I would say when I was talking about challenges earlier, I didn't get into it too much, but I think that was a big challenge that I had to learn how to deal with in graduate school, and then more so as a PhD, where there's a constant feeling of like things aren't done and not wanting to quit for the day until they are, but knowing that it's impossible to complete things. And so I think around the time of my postdoc, I started getting interested in meditation and mindfulness and philosophy surrounding that. And so I think that was really helpful, just this idea of accepting how much you can and can't do each day and working until the last possible minute, going home, still thinking about work, feeling bad that I hadn't finished something, waking up in the morning, dreading all the things I had to do and probably wouldn't get done that day. So I now kind of have the perspective that I just have to I still don't have like a strict schedule, but essentially by like 7:00, for example, I'm just going to quit for the day and just accept that whatever I get done, that's what I'm going to get done. And so on a day-to-day basis, I try to just keep that perspective. Like there's only so much I can do, and feeling bad about not getting it done isn't making it get done. And if anything, it's making less get done because I'm just feeling bad about things not getting done. So that's been helpful. And then even bigger picture, the philosophy that I adopted was that if I can't have a career in research on the terms that I want, then I don't want that career. And so what I mean by that is like, I definitely hear from colleagues that they work 70 or 80 hours a week. Well, I personally know, like, because I do track my hours, if I could work 70 hours 1 week, but that's it. Like I am exhausted at the end of that. And so I try not to listen to what other people are doing. I know from tracking how I'm spending my time about how many hours, like just physically, I can manage. When I say physically, I mean mentally, emotionally, just when is my performance going to decline if I keep trying to push it? And so I've just been like, if I can't have this career working an amount of time that is healthy for me, then it's not the career that I want. And so occasionally, yes, I have to push myself and make sacrifices, but I've definitely had, like, for example, wanting to go see my new baby niece when I also had some other important deadlines, and just saying, well, I'm going to go see my niece and figure it out, because I don't want to have this career if I can't go see my baby niece in DC and things like that. And I would say another thing that I found is, once I make a decision, like, okay, I may sacrifice a little bit of work for personal, once I know that I'm going to need to devote that time to the personal, somehow I'm more efficient in my work as well. So it is kind of helpful for me to have like these goals. And then I also take regular vacations. I've been fortunate in the last few years to be able to take several vacations, but I find that my head is clear and I have a much better perspective. So I definitely encourage everybody in my lab to take vacation and just be self-aware. Like, if you're not feeling great, take the day off, or know when you need a break. So I think those are the main ways. Oh, and working out helps me find balance as well. Because if you prioritize making time to work out, then you're either going to have to detract from sleep or working, I guess, for me anyway. So I have just decided, no, I have to cut off my work day at a certain point so I can take time to do some kind of workout before I go home.
I'm really glad to hear that you shape your career in the way that you want it to be. I wish a lot more people did that in academia, especially in academia, because we forget sometimes. Sometimes it is the excitement of the work, or maybe you're motivated more than you thought you would be, and you continue to work and go after those goals that you have planned. But it's really important to take that time away. People have different lifestyles nowadays, families scattered all over the world. Sometimes international students are all alone in a different country doing their PhD work or postdoc work, and getting that time off to go see their family or hang out with their friends. Having that flexibility is very important. So I'm really glad to see that you're taking actions to do something about it. Demand that, you need flexibility. If there is more demand, then there will be more solutions to this problem of academics being stressed out, burnt out, and going to the point of even having depression. A lot of academics do experience that, but perhaps maybe you don't hear it that often, especially if you're outside of academia. My next question is, what is one myth about being an assistant professor and a researcher that you would like to debunk today?
I mean, I don't know if it's a myth, but
a misconception, perhaps.
Yeah, misconception. And just going back to what we were just talking about, I think the idea that all you can really do is be married to your career, and maybe, I mean, I do have colleagues that they have small children and they manage it, but I think that I just got this impression when I was coming up in academia that, like, my research had to be the top thing and nothing else could even come close. And so I want to dispel that idea. I want for people to realize that you can have balance. And I would say, I think, like, some of my colleagues, they wear being stressed out as a badge of honor. And so their students see that, and then they also think they have to be like that. And so I would say I'm trying to normalize vacations. Like, at first I was like afraid to tell my colleagues that I take vacation or that I'm having fun, because it's like they're all so serious. And now that's, like, I guess my little tiny, like, mission is to be like, yes, you can be happy and enjoy your life and be successful as a researcher as well.
Oh, definitely. Thank you for pointing that out. We have to try, as those who are in academia, to sort of not glorify being stressed and being busy all the time. I think it's our responsibility for the next generation and our future as well. As we're coming to the end of our interview, what advice would you give to someone considering your path, especially in your field?
Find time for balance, obviously. Take care of yourself. And then the other thing is, don't give up, which sounds a little bit trite, I guess, but I really think it's true that it's more important to be persistent than be perfect or be rewarded or right the first time. Just keep trying. And if you have an idea and submit it for consideration in whatever avenue and it gets shot down, don't give up on it. Just keep trying to push forward on whatever it is that you're pursuing. And I think that is what I've heard from so many people, like people that have faculty jobs. They say some people apply to hundreds of positions. So I think being persistent, and then also not accepting the dogma about how your career is supposed to go. So that's the other thing that I think that I can be an example of, is is that I didn't go straight from a postdoctoral position to applying for a faculty job. I took longer to get there, but I was persistent and it worked out. And I'm at the university where I want to be in doing research that I love. So I think, just be creative with how you get to your goals. You don't have to do it exactly how everybody says.
Wonderful advice. It can be intimidating sometimes. You feel like following one path, how everyone else is doing it, because it's easier that way. But I think it's more important to choose the path that fits you and your lifestyle and your goals. Is there anything else that you would like to add, Regina, to this discussion? Anything about research or anything that you might like to share with our audience that might be helpful to them, or even to you if you would like to put out there what the work that you're doing that we didn't talk about?
Yeah. Finding good mentors is also really helpful. Find people that you look up to and make them your mentor or ask them to mentor you. I didn't realize this is something that you don't need just one mentor, or even if you have one that's your direct mentor, I think seeking out many mentors, people who can mentor you in different aspects, is extremely helpful. And then not just maybe scientifically and professionally, but just personally, you like the way they carry themselves. That's another way that you could get mentoring. So that would be the only, I think, piece of advice we didn't cover already.
And a follow-up question to that, how do you advise students to search up potential supervisors, and how would they correctly make a judgment of a good mentor?
Yeah, that's a complicated question. So I would say search for, within most universities, I think they have different types of mechanisms for finding faculty that are doing work or research that you're interested in. So use those. I know at UT we have something called Eureka, but I don't know if that's something that all universities have, but something like that for matching interests. And then I think deciding if somebody's a good mentor, I ask the people that work with them and listen to what they don't say as much as what they do say. Often people are reluctant to say negative things about the people they work with, but you can listen for the absence of things as well. So that's something I kind of do when I'm trying to get feedback about somebody. I pay attention to what's not said as much as what is said. And I think it's always good when mentors make time for people in their lab. So that's a question you can ask that seems neutral, but is actually really important. Like, how much time does this person make for the people that work with them, is a good way of kind of assessing if the person would be a good mentor fit for you.
Regina, thank you so much for taking some time off of your busy schedule and joining us to talk about what your journey has been like and about your research. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. It was fun. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us for another new episode of Sagacity. I hope you found this episode helpful. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.